I should probably fire off a Roman candle or something. We made it to Third John. It took a long time to get here. Well, that's how I roll. Sorry. Well, I'm not really that sorry. Anyway, Third John, the the third short letter from the Apostle John. Now, in this letter, we're going to meet a couple of specific individuals that you'll as we go along, you'll get that more or less instantly. The first of those two is a guy named Gaius. The second is a guy named Diotrephes. Just when we encounter them, you'll know. Okay, we're looking for these guys, right? So let's start at the beginning. The elder. Well, that's how John started his second letter. The elder, as though this is not to a individual that he didn't know or to people who would need some kind of introduction. This third of his letters is to my dear friend Gaius, whom I love in the truth. The older I get, the more meaningful, true, deep, lasting friendships are. And the fewer of them there are. I could be, that just could be me, but I have a feeling most people would say the same thing. When you get into your sixth decade and on the back end of it now, I remember in my grade school, junior high, and high school years, I had more friends than I knew what to do with. Went to college and I acquired a bunch of friends there. In my 20s and even in my 30s, it was no big deal to acquire friends. But toward my middle 30s and on, it got harder. One of the difficult periods of my life was in my 30s. I got bonded with a bunch of other youth ministers. We were living in Tulsa, and there was about 6 of us that got together almost every week, and we prayed with each other. We laughed at each other. We talked about where we were going and what we were doing, and if we came across any new ideas, we'd share those. We didn't know what we were doing. We were just doing the best we could, and for really all of us, we were making it up every day as we went along. Well, some of these guys, all of these guys had really high ceilings in terms of their capability. And this happens in ministry, and you probably already know it, but somebody that's got a high ceiling in terms of their capacity and capability is going to get noticed. And somebody out there in another church is looking for somebody like them. And that's what happened. And our group began to go away. All but about 2 of us left the area. I was close to these guys, and I liked them. I'd even say I loved them. And to have shared life in that way, and by the way, this was long, long before the small groups movement that is now just a given in nearly all churches. It was before that was ever a thing, and in fact, and this was a bad thing, but it's true. So I'll just go ahead and tell you. If you were in a Christian church, an independent Christian church during the 70s and 80s, the big pushback on small groups was, well, that's where a lot of wacky stuff happens in them small groups. And we can't control what goes on in there, which is true. And that urge to control and the fear of something you can't control, manage to keep a lid on any kind of formalized small group ministry in churches. But funny, people still tend to gravitate into small groups. Well, okay, that's a whole different subject and bunny trail I don't need to go down. But I do remember the gap that was left in my life when these really dear friends of mine were called away to other parts of the country, to other ministries. Every once in a while, I still encounter a few of these guys. And when I do, wow, it's so refreshing and wonderful. And to have dear friends, it's not the same thing as just friends. And I think part of why this dear friends category has changed for me over time as I've aged is I have a much better sense of what dear actually means. So John doesn't just say, to my friend Gaius, to my dear friend Gaius, whom I love in the truth. Honestly, we don't know very much more about Gaius than what we'll learn as we look at this letter. John writes this within a very close time frame from when he wrote 1 John and 2 John, those letters, and before he penned the book of Revelation. So it was in the mid to late 80s, not the 1980s, just the 80s. And the world was essentially what it was when he wrote his other books, his other letters. I don't think John thought, well, I'll write a book in the Bible. I don't think that's not what motivated him. All three of his letters were written to address challenges and issues and problems in the churches that he served and loved. Now he writes to Gaius, an individual whom he calls a dear friend, who he says he loves him in the truth. I'm fumbling around because it's hard for me to not make a lot out of that phrase, whom I love in the truth, because it sets a context for their relationship. Their relationship was founded in the truth and on the truth. What truth? Not scientific truth, not even philosophical truth. The truth. Capital T, truth. Go back to what Jesus said about himself. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And you remember from our study of 2 John that John was strong on the idea that if you are in Christ, you live in the truth. But when you choose not to live in the truth, you can't live in Christ and not live in the truth, right? And those are my words, my impression, interpretation of it. But I think that was one of his messages, one of his very strong messages. Here, a kind friend, a dear friend, who John loves in the truth. Many application in this moment. Is there anybody in your world, your life, as dear to you, who you love in the truth? I'm pretty sure there are. God is really kind that way, that he sets us up where we're in community with people. And in that community, there are people that we just have a click with. I mean, there's just this thing. Has that ever happened to you? You meet somebody and you talk with them, and you think, man, it feels like I've known you for a long time, and this is our first meeting. Well, who was that person? Who are those people? Maybe a thing that this could cue us for is to take a few minutes today and send a note or an email or a text message or a phone call just to say, I don't know, whatever you want to say. For me, I'll probably write, I've got about 3 or 4 of those folks that fit in this category that I haven't communicated with in a while. And I'll just say, reading 3 John 1, Paul says Gaius is his dear friend whom he loves in the truth, and it made me think of you. I think to receive a message like that would be an honor if I were to get that message. He goes on, dear friend. See, he calls him dear friend twice. I don't know that there's a big, huge thing in that, but I just think this is a reiteration of John's relationship with Gaius, dear friend. I pray that you may enjoy good health and that all may go well with you, even as your soul is getting along. Now, other translations, they say it differently. Here, I'll find it here in the King James version of the Bible. Well, why can't it come up? It talks about that you are prospering even as your soul is prospering. That the idea is, I want you, and in the New International Version, which I generally study from, he says, dear friend, I pray that you may enjoy good health and that all may go well with you, even as your soul is getting along well. Quick thing on this that really deserves a longer look. John was not unconcerned about Gaius's health and his physical well-being, and he says so. His hope was that Gaius would be well and that everything would go as it ought to with him. But he also says, and that you may, in the same way that your soul is doing well, the rest of your life will do well. I'm not sure, but I don't think there are enough times in general that our entire being gets addressed. I love that John said, I want you to be healthy. I want your life to work. And what I want is that they would be as good and healthy and well as your soul is. Again, this is part of getting old, but the older I get, the more important it is to think about my overall health. See, if I'm going to, I'd love to not retire, I think. There are times I wish I could, work less and still have an income and sleep in if I wanted to. And, but I don't really want to quit working. I don't want to retire. In order for that to happen, I got to stay healthy. I have to pay attention to my health. And I've begun to pay attention to my health in ways that I never did when I was younger. I think most Christians need to pay attention to their physical health, but we got to pay attention to our spiritual health, to the wellness and the health of our soul. How do you do that? Well, we're going to talk some more about that next time when we get together on So Care with Stevie Boy.